It is important that anything in this podcast or any other content we produce is not misconstrued as medical advice. We cannot diagnose, prescribe, treat, or cure any animal. In order to do any of that, a veterinarian must see your pet in person to develop what is called the veterinarian client patient relationship, or VCPR. Oh.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our first official episode of the Healing Your Pet podcast by Healing Bay Pet Nutrition. I'm Alex Roberts, and this is my husband.
I'm Jesse Roberts.
We're really excited to keep this ball rolling and hopefully be able to help you guys just take the best possible care of your pets, whether they're sick, whether they're healthy as could be right now, just wherever they're at in life, trying to kind of take that to the next level and really help them live to their fullest potential.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to try to talk about the different forms of pet food on the market, which sounds simple at first, and it's not. I mean, even just that is overwhelming. So it seems like a good place to start to kind of help you start thinking about the basics and pros and cons of all the different formats that you can buy food in, and help make good choices for your pets.
Yep, exactly. So a couple weeks ago now, when we first started doing this, I put out a Substack ranking the different types of pet food. It's the Healing Your Pet Substack. I think it's under Healing Bay Pet, though, is the URL. I'll put it up there for you. So years of working in the pet industry for both of us, we know most people feed kibble. Most people don't even know there are other options. This is especially true when it comes to things even like canned food. Like, people don't see canned food being as a primary way to feed your dog. Like, it's always supplementing kibble, things like that. And so the first thing we wanted to address here was the ranking system. So we're going to go from the food we think is the least, the food we recommend the least, up to the best options. So I know this is, for a lot of people hear this, it's kind of shocking, but the one that we like the least is kibble. So we'll start there. Why don't we don't hate kibble. We don't hate all kibble. Not all kibble is created the same, but as a general rule, why are we not too crazy about it?
Yeah, so, and I will just say right off the bat, like you said, all kibble is not created the same, but that is a whole different podcast topic, could easily be multiple different podcast topics.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just using blanket term all kibble today. In general is going to fall at the bottom. So yes, keep in mind, some kibbles I would rank above some canned foods, etc. So again, just very generic. Kibble in general, we rank at the bottom. The reason being, no matter what, even ones that start with really high quality ingredients, really fresh ingredients, and when I read the back of that bag, they're ingredients I like, in order to create that kibble form, a few things are involved that are really not great for your pet, unfortunately. So one is it needs to be cooked. I say it needs to be cooked to death.
Mm-hmm. Cooked to oblivion.
Cooked to oblivion, yeah. Cooked to death. It's not good. We know in our own food, it's pretty common knowledge these days that the more heavily processed your food is, the worse it is for you, right? You want to have as much fresh food in your diet as possible. So, of course, naturally, that is the same for any animal, your pets included. So it has to be absolutely cooked to oblivion. Like, we're talking minimum 600 degrees, that's pretty high. And some other things that absolutely must be involved simply in order to create those little crispy chunkies. It needs to be primarily carbohydrate. So even kibbles that are considered high protein. You know, they have a high protein percentage on the bag. They could be 40-something% protein. They've got the first 3 ingredients are all meat, you know, which is great. It's still going to be primarily carbohydrates. Now, something sneaky is no company wants you to know that, and they are not required to list the amount of carbohydrates on the bag. This is another topic. We will address this separately, but I'm just putting that in there as a little aside so you know, because it's a little tricky. We'll talk about how to figure that out on another podcast. Cooked to death has to be primarily carbohydrates, and that is because essentially think of it as baking cookies into like cardboard, you know, like it's like burning the heck out of a batch of cookies, you know, in order to get that cookie dough, that kind of batter consistency. It's flour, right? It's all carbohydrates. Then you add a little bit of moisture. That's the only way for it to stick together. If you don't have carbohydrates, nothing's going to stick. And then you cook it till it's crispy. And then if you cook it way past being crispy, then it turns into kibble consistency. So those are probably my biggest ones, along with really many other details, but we can probably have a whole episode talking more specifically just about kibble.
A real quick aside to that too is the food that when you get a kibble, the food that's cooked to oblivion, like we said, loses a lot of the nutrients in the process. So to get the nutrients back in the food, to make it a whole food, they usually spray it back on after, and they use all kinds of nasty stuff in that process, and it's not good to have that sitting around in the bag. You know, there's this premise about kibble that it's somehow safer than raw food, and it's like kibble gets recalled all the time for the same things that people are afraid of feeding raw food for, and also a lot of that stuff they spray on there sits in, you know, some people have bags of dog food sitting around for a month, maybe even longer, if they have a real
that's pretty typical. I mean,
real little dog,
a lot more than that.
And they have it open, and that oil's on there and all that stuff. It gets real nasty and contaminated. So, those are just like she said, those are the big ones with kibble, which is something we'll have to cover entirely in a different day. But the next food that we would, you know, a step up from kibble to us is just plain old canned dog food, which is like I said earlier, lots of people don't realize you can exclusively feed canned food to your dog. But it's better than feeding kibble for sure. But what's the deal with canned food over kibble?
Yeah, so I'd say the two things that make canned food better than kibble, you know, just again, generically, it's really the opposite of those reasons that we just said we don't love kibble. So one, it does not need to be it doesn't need to be primarily carbohydrates. You can get that canned food mush pate consistency with a lot of protein. This does not mean all canned food automatically has more meat in it than kibble, unfortunately, but it's not required to be primarily carbohydrates in order to get that consistency. And then the other one is you still have a lot of moisture content in it. So it does still get heated to extremely high temperatures in the canning process. So in that way, the processing itself isn't really much better than the kibble, but you still have all that moisture left, whereas it's all totally eliminated from the kibble, which, again, kind of going into the details of specifically why that's bad, definitely we'll save for a later date. But it's a big deal. Having the moisture is awesome. Really, really good thing to still have. What I will say is a big con to feeding canned food, like Jesse said, most canned foods can be fed on their own. Side note, it's important to note, to make sure you read on that can that it isn't for, it'll say for supplemental feeding only. Yeah. Those, just like what it sounds like, are for supplemental feeding only, you know, to be used as treats or a topper to a complete diet. But most canned foods on the market are actually complete diets, can be fed on their own. So the catch is to feed canned food by itself normally gets really expensive. Yeah, you look at a can, it's like, oh, it's $2-3. Cool.
Yeah, if you have a big dog, that's a lot of money. I mean, you're cases a week probably. So
yeah. It's just generally it's unrealistic to feed something that costly, especially when we can actually feed better food that ends up being less expensive. So we can get into that. So what's next?
So kind of a more recent thing, and I guess recent being the last 6-7 years, I guess, is the baked kibble thing. So baked kibble is it's kind of a new, like some brands of food that we like. Like the Honest Kitchen, and I mean I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying brands I know that do baked kibble. Stella and Chewy's does one, which they do raw food as well. But the baked kibble is it's a step above canned food, and it's it's not quite getting into that realm of raw, but baked kibble is overall better than it's far better than regular kibble, and better than canned food. It's usually more affordable than feeding exclusively canned food. But does the baked kibble, like, what makes it better than the raw? I mean, not the raw, by the regular kibble and the canned food.
Yeah. So to be honest with you, this is a tough one. So I will say it's easy to say it's better than regular kibble, and regular kibble, just for the record, it's called extruded kibble. It's not going to say that on the bag, but probably almost 99% of kibbles on the market are extruded kibble. So baked is not extruded, it's baked. So because it's not extruded, it doesn't need quite as high of a carbohydrate content. Still needs quite a bit of carbs in order, again, it's like we're baking cookies. But does not need to be heated to the super extreme temperatures. So you still have original nutrients left from those whole food ingredients that you're actually reading on the bag. That's huge. Now, where it's a little tricky is saying, is baked kibble really that much better than a canned food? It's not that cut and dry. I mean, there are some canned foods that I would say, I would say this is better than a baked kibble. But, again, we're just talking generic here, because some canned foods are, like, really not good, and then there's some canned foods that are, like, amazing. The baked kibbles that are on the market, however, there's not a ton of them. There's a handful or so. I don't know. There's probably like a dozen or so now, but not many at all. Very few. And every single one of them, that I'm aware of at least, it's a high quality product.
Yeah.
I don't know of a single one of them that is like, oh, it's baked, great, better than extruded, but
there are also brands that I normally would recommend, or brands that I appreciate what they do as far as anything they make. So I think that's a big thing with those companies that make their baked food, is it's never just like, I don't know, I'm not going to call out any big brands here, but it's never some of like the major brands that just kind of put the same junk into all their food, and it's all just kind of the same thing across the board. These companies do really, they're family owned usually. They're smaller companies that have higher standards.
Yep. So yeah, that's really why I would rank baked kibble above the canned food, but again, it certainly depends, because again, you've got that moisture in the canned food that you're losing in the baked kibble.
Yep. Okay. So the next up here is dehydrated food, and dehydrated food, I know historically, as far as like it's more of a natural type of food, but it's also usually was more cost effective type thing. Nowadays, I don't know for sure. It's just because nowadays I don't think anything's really cost effective when it comes to feeding. I was looking at some of the prices of the dehydrated as of late, and it was like exponential price jump. But they are usually more cost effective, because you get it. You'll see this box on the shelf, and you're like, there's no way this is going to last at all. But it's a lot of food for what you're getting. What's the difference between like just dehydrated food versus regular raw food or refrigerated food.
Yeah. So the dehydrated food, we can pretty clearly say put it above kibble or canned food because you've got these whole ingredients that are, you can see the whole ingredients still in the food for the most part. It's awesome. So when you buy a dehydrated food, it comes as kind of a powdery type thing, depends on the company. Some are more powdery, some are more chunky.
Kind of looks like a soup mix sometimes. Like if you buy a box of soup mix, that's what it looks like to me.
Yep, like a soup mix or like muesli, a little bit
somewhere between
something
there.
Like that. Yeah. And then you add water and it kind of fluffs up. Most dogs love it. So historically, it has been a really great bang for your buck option because, just like Jesse said, you get this seemingly small box, but it turns into a ton of food.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of sticker shock looking at that box or seemingly small bags. Like, whoa, that seems like a lot of money for that thing. But really, you're buying the equivalent of like 2 large bags of kibble in one little box. So when you look at it that way, it's generally much less expensive than even kind of mediocre kibbles. Like Jesse said, prices have skyrocketed. To be honest with you, I can't tell you the exact, I can't crunch the numbers off the top of my head, but really, I think it's really just gone up similarly,
to all their dog food, all their pet food, I guess.
Yeah. We haven't been in the retail industry for a good 5 or so years
it's been
now.
4 years for me. So I was managing a pet store, and that was in the fall of 2020 when I stopped. Yeah. So since then, prices have gone up all over the place. But at the time, dehydrated was still a good deal. And if you sit there and you do the comparison, you compare the price between how much kibbles jumped or canned foods jumped, I'm sure it's still probably a better deal.
Yep. So anyway, that was a little bit of a side tangent there. But so now I'm actually going to answer your question. Why I still rank it below a like gently cooked frozen food or an actual raw of some form, whether it's a freeze-dried raw or frozen raw. It is still heated to like a couple hundred degrees. Sorry, one of our cats is meowing in the background. You might be able to hear that. He's very upset. We locked him out. So it's still heated to a couple hundred degrees, so reasonable, but it is enough to damage some fragile nutrients in those original ingredients. And then, of course, by the nature of dehydrating it, you're removing all the moisture, so that needs to be added back in. And for the most part, there do have to be some more vitamins and minerals added back in, sometimes in synthetic forms with these foods. Again, just because some of those nutrients are being destroyed by heating it a bit, whereas in truly raw foods, generally you can add less synthetic vitamins and minerals back in. All right, next up, our last couple options here.
So, gently cooked refrigerated food. It's this kind of a new weird thing. There, you see, a lot of the brands that make it, I was not always crazy about, but there is more options out there when it comes to the refrigerated thing. Why? I know, so I understand refrigerated is more along the lines of actual raw food, but like, why bother feeding refrigerated food over raw, for one, or like if you're going to do that, and also like, how does it compare to regular raw food?
Yeah, so, and I guess I will just add that the gently cooked thing, it seems like it's a little bit of a boom in the market right now, having quote-unquote gently cooked. That's how it's marketed to you. Gently cooked means nothing, but basically it means it is quote-unquote gently cooked maybe to 100 to 200 degrees without removing all that moisture. They can be refrigerated or frozen as well. Some come frozen. So the con, which I feel like I've said this for everything, but to repeat myself again, The con of the heating process, even at these low temperatures, you are still destroying some of those fragile nutrients. So that's why it's not as good as a completely uncooked or raw food. But I will put a caveat in here. Yet again, this could be another whole podcast episode. So the caveat is raw food is not appropriate for every single animal on the planet. There are certainly instances where I will recommend a gently cooked food. I prefer homemade always because, that can be its own podcast episode as well. But for many reasons, homemade's best, which just seems pretty logical anyway. But it can be very time consuming. So if a gently cooked food is appropriate for your pet, buying these commercially made, quote unquote, gently cooked foods can be awesome. It might be your best option for your pet. But again, so minimal destruction of nutrients at least, and still have the moisture left in them those are the big pros. Yeah.
Okay. So the last two I'll kind of lump together here. Is there your actual raw foods? You have freeze-dried raw, and then you have refrigerated or frozen raw, basically. These are not cooked. They're not cooked at all. They're just actual raw food, commercial raw food. And then I guess we do have one more category after that. But as far as stuff you buy at the store, freeze-dried raw and raw food are the next best options for us. Now, when it comes to freeze-dried versus frozen, is there really a huge difference?
So, hypothetically, the freeze-dried versus the frozen raw foods should be the exact same thing. It is, you have the raw ingredients there. One is freeze-dried, so there's no heating involved, right? It's a cooling process to dry it out. That makes it shelf-stable. And then the other one is just simply frozen, shipped to the store frozen, stays frozen until you're ready to defrost in your refrigerator to feed to your critter. Some tests that have been done do show there is some minimal degradation of a couple nutrients in the freeze-drying process. So if we're being nitpicky, I would say the frozen raw is better than the freeze-dried raw, but it's genuinely just, it's nitpicking. Now, the frozen raw is much less expensive than the freeze-dried raw.
Yeah.
Again, the freeze-dried raw is shelf-stable. It's awesome. Obviously makes life super easy, but man, do you pay for convenience in that department. And you're not simply being upcharged for convenience. It is the process of freeze-drying is takes
forever to freeze-dry it.
Extremely time-consuming, takes massive, expensive machinery. That's why it's so much more expensive. But as far as, the consumer, you, is concerned, that's all that matters here. You're paying for convenience. So generally, my recommendation there is it's the perfect travel food. Or
people use it a lot as a mixer when it comes to the raw food. They'll mix it with their kibble, or they'll crush it up, put it on it as a topper, or even treats. It's just like recommending that to feed exclusively freeze-dried, unless you have a little tiny dog maybe, or a dog that, I don't know why. Some people, it's like their dog probably won't eat the frozen or whatever. You could try that. It doesn't really reconstitute very well either. So if you're adding the water back in, it does okay. It does not quite like the frozen would have that nice moisture content. The freeze-dried, I always notice it just takes forever to kind of seep some of that water out.
Yep. And just final comment on that one is that if you have a dog that will not eat anything, try freeze-dried. It is almost without fail the most palatable form of food on the market. Different brands are all different. If you're experimenting, try 2 or 3 just little tiny bags to start with. That's a bit of an aside here. All right, and then our final little tidbit here to wrap things up
is homemade raw food. And this is something that lots of people will have mixed feelings about. But is homemade raw food safe to feed to your pet?
Well, when prepared correctly, yes. absolutely. This is going to be its own whole podcast episode as
Mhm.
well, because there are a lot of nuances here, and there are a lot of understandable concerns. So I want to address those for people. And I can't do that in 2 minutes. But I will also say that I'm going to put homemade food,
Yeah,
whether it
the
is
raw or regular food. Yep.
or gently cooked, at the top of our list here. Yet again, lots of reasons why homemade is best. Gonna have to be its own episode, and certain instances where I will actually recommend you cook your pet's food versus leaving it raw.
We could even make the next episode about this topic, just to clear the air.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although it seems like the next episode has about 6 topics that I've
Yeah.
said now in here we need to do next.
Yeah, I did write up a thing. I put this up on our Substack last week, though, so it may not be a bad thing to go hand in hand. But yeah, just the idea. Big reason for this too, we like, is because it's so much more affordable to do, to feed homemade raw or homemade gently cooked. Like, we feed our animals homemade raw food, and I can tell you it saves a significant amount of money. And I'm telling people are hurting right now financially. If you do it the right way, yeah, it's a great deal to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's way cheaper than feeding a lot of kibbles
Mm-hmm.
that are on the market even. So, absolute best thing for your pet. And, you know, if you're trying to be on a budget, then it's really easy to make this the cheapest, or at least close to the cheapest way to feed your pet. And 100% the cheapest way to feed your pet while trying to save on vet bills.
Yep.
So yeah, we'll wrap it up with that. I wanted to put in here, like, something for you to implement these ideas into your daily routine, but with this one,
It's not
I
really
don't know.
much you can do here.
Yeah, it's like every category I think we kind of went over, you know, pros
Yeah.
and cons, and I think for this one that's about all I can give you as far as implementing into your daily routine. I mean, we could make an episode on each one of these categories and really break down the pros and cons, and then give you, you know, a way to implement, like, things other than kibble into your daily routine. You know, if
Mhm.
your reality is, I've just got to feed kibble to my pet, that's the best I can do. Like, we want to meet you there, you know. But I'd love to give you guys ideas for things you can, like, spice up your kibble, you know, make the kibble a little better than just kibble. So,
Spice it up.
yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna call it there, and then keep an eye out for, you know, like, look up the Substack. I've been putting out stuff every week, and also more of this. And then when the website's up and running, we'll have guides on how to do all of this, things on how you should pick your kibble, stuff like that. It's a little ways out yet, but I've gotten a good chunk of it done. And when it's up, it'll be a nice guide to go along with what we're doing.
Yep. All right, that's all for now. Thanks so much for listening to this slightly longer episode than intended.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Listening. We'd love your feedback on what you think of the podcast, even the formatting of it. For example, if you prefer a longer or a shorter podcast, let us know. We genuinely want to be as helpful as possible for our listeners. And of course, share this with your friends and family so that we can help their pets live their healthiest lives possible. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we post a video version on the major video streaming platforms. Wishing you and your furry family members good health. Bye for now.